Picture this, a dusty parade ground in Bengal, late 1700s. Two armies face each other in the heat. On one side, soldiers in red coats march to the beat of British drums. On the other, Indian sepoys in similar uniforms, drilled in the same tactics, wielding the same muskets. They're not rebels. They're not a foreign nation's army. They're employees. By 1805, their employer, the British East India Company, commands over 200,000 soldiers. More troops than the British Crown itself can field. Their mission isn't defending a homeland, it's defending profits. Behind those marching boots lies a story filled with explosive stock prices, private fortunes, and collapse. And when the whole thing teeters on the edge, Parliament steps in to rescue it. Along the way, 10 million people die in one of history's worst famines. In the same year, peasants in Bengal starve to death. Executives ship record profits back to London. This isn't just a story about empire. It's about what happens when a corporation is handed the power of a state. No elections, no constitution, just a charter, a monopoly, and a simple rule: squeeze out as much wealth as possible. So how did a trading company, born to buy spices and silk, become a war machine that conquered nations and helped trigger famine in India and revolution in America? And more disturbingly, are we really sure this story belongs only to the past? Now imagine you're a peasant farmer in Bengal in the 1760s. Your world is small: rice fields, the monsoon, a village god, a local landlord. You've heard of emperors in Delhi and nawabs in palaces, but they rarely touch your life. When drought strikes, local rulers open grain stores, ease taxes, and your people scrape through. Then almost overnight, the rules change. New officials arrive, backed by Indian soldiers taking orders from Englishmen. The name is strange: Company Bahadur. But that company now holds the Diwani, the right to collect every land tax from Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. In just 2 years, what they take from the region jumps from about $600,000 to $2.5 million. The land doesn't suddenly become richer. The company just digs deeper. For viewers today, the numbers sound remote. So think of it this way. One corporation now sets your taxes, seizes your land, and commands an army to enforce its ledgers. If you can't pay, you lose your field. If the rains fail, the tax doesn't. Now multiply your village by tens of thousands, because what happens next in Bengal will kill around a third of its people. And the logic driving it, privatize the gains, socialize the losses, feels uncomfortably modern. When a corporate gamble collapses, those farthest from the boardroom often pay the highest price. Our story really kicks off at a muddy battlefield called Plassey in 1757. Robert Clive, a troubled young clerk turned soldier, leads a few thousand company troops against the Nawab of Bengal. The Nawab commands a vastly larger army. But Clive has two hidden weapons: European drill and bribes. He pays key generals to stand aside when the fighting begins. The battle is less heroic showdown, more corporate-backed coup. When the smoke clears, the richest province in India effectively belongs to a London company. Clive, who once arrived in India mired in debt, walks away with a personal haul worth hundreds of millions in today's money. He takes a jagir, a tax estate, that pays him an astonishing $90,000 a year for 7 years. It's as if a regional tax office is quietly redirected into one man's bank account. Investors in London take note. Company stock skyrockets after Plassey, then soars again after another victory at Buxar in 1764. A savvy shareholder can see their wealth multiply several times over in just over a decade. This isn't trade, it's conquest turned into a financial product. But military glory comes with a hunger. To hold Bengal, the company keeps expanding its private army. From about 18,000 troops in 1763, its forces explode to over 115,000 by the early 1780s. Mostly Indian sepoys under British officers, drilled like Europeans, fighting for corporate pay. These officers aren't royal servants. They're employees whose fortunes rise or fall with the company share price. Every conquered district means more land revenue, more contracts, more opportunities for gifts. So war becomes business, and business needs constant war. Meanwhile, in Bengal's villages, a quieter revolution unfolds. Under the new revenue system, zamindars, landlords, are recognized as landowners, but the company takes first cut. In many areas, it claims more than half of what the soil produces. Sometimes 50% of a farmer's harvest, sometimes 60% if the land is irrigated. For someone living on subsistence, that isn't just high tax. Losing half your harvest in a good year leaves you hungry. In a bad year, it becomes a death sentence. Company officers see Bengal's wealth as a buffet. They're allowed to trade privately, accept presents, and run side deals. One junior executive during the worst years corners the local grain market. He buys up rice and resells it at outrageous prices, raking in over $60,000 while people around him starve. By the late 1760s, company remittances back to Britain average about £500,000 a year. At the exact moment Bengal begins to crack, in 1770-71, they peak at over $1 million. London grows rich. Calcutta tightens the screw. And then, the sky quite literally dries up. In 1769, the monsoon fails. Fields crack, ponds shrink, and nervous jokes pass from village to village. The rains don't come the next year either. Crops fail on a massive scale. What should be a natural disaster becomes something far worse. Under Indian rulers, drought usually triggered emergency rules: open grain reserves, suspend taxes, bring in grain from elsewhere. Famines still happened, but they were buffered. The East India Company takes a different view. Its armies still need food. Its shareholders still expect dividends. Its debts still demand interest. So the company does three things that together turn drought into engineered catastrophe. First, it refuses to cut taxes. In some places, it even raises them to keep revenue up to standard. Warren Hastings, the governor, later admits that during this great calamity, revenue was violently kept up. Even when people have no harvest, the bill still arrives. Second, company agents dive into the grain trade. They buy up rice to feed troops. Others hoard supplies to resell later at absurd markups. The numbers are shocking. In normal times, 1 rupee buys about 120 seers of rice. By June 1770, that same rupee buys just 3 seers. Imagine your basic food price jumping 40-fold in a year. Your wages don't. Your taxes don't. Third, there is almost no meaningful relief. No large-scale public granaries opened, no wide tax remission, no real price controls. Grain continues to flow out of Bengal to other company territories and overseas. Merchants follow profit, not pity. Bodies begin appearing by the roads. Families sell their tools, then their jewelry, then their children, and finally themselves for a handful of grain. Whole villages vanish. Fields lie untended. In some districts, there are more corpses than living tenants. By the time a few late measures limp into action, it's far too late. Around 10 million people are dead, roughly a third of Bengal's entire population. Back in Calcutta, one senior company man, Richard Becker, writes a horrified report. He admits the country had flourished under despotic native rulers, but under the English is verging towards its ruin. His colleagues greet his letter with laughter and ignore it. In London, the company's shareholders calmly vote to increase their dividend. Even the famine doesn't interrupt the flow of profit. And yet, all this blood-soaked wealth still can't keep the numbers afloat. Maintaining a private empire is expensive. By 1770-71, the company spends over $3.2 million on its forces and operations in Bengal. But revenue brings in barely $2.5 million. The company is at war with arithmetic. To bridge the gap, it leans on 3 crutches: higher taxes in India, more borrowing in London, and generous dividends to keep investors sweet. It's financial self-cannibalism. Then another front of crisis opens, this time in America. For years, colonists there have smuggled in cheap Dutch tea to avoid British taxes and company prices. By the early 1770s, something like 85% of tea drunk in the colonies isn't East India Company tea. In Britain, mountains of unsold company tea pile up, 17 to 18 million pounds of it, sitting in warehouses and losing value. At the same time, the company owes the British government an annual payment for its monopoly and falls behind. Debts mount in India as well, to the tune of over $1.2 million. Then in 1772, a speculative bet in London detonates the whole fragile structure. A financier named Alexander Fordyce shorts company stock and loses catastrophically. When he flees to France, he leaves hundreds of thousands of pounds in unpaid debts. Several major London banks crash. Within weeks, the panic spreads to Amsterdam, Hamburg, across Europe. Suddenly, the East India Company, this monster of war, trade, and taxes, looks like it might simply fall over. If it goes, it drags banks, merchants, and government revenue down with it. Parliament stares into the abyss and makes a choice that will echo into our own time. It bails the company out. In 1773, Parliament passes what we now see as the first great corporate rescue package. On paper, it's called the Regulating Act, paired with a Tea Act. The government offers the company crucial loans to keep it afloat. In return, it starts placing the company under supervision, appointing a governor-general in Bengal and creating a Supreme Court in Calcutta. At the same time, Parliament helps solve that tea mountain problem. The Tea Act lets the company ship tea directly to the American colonies, cutting out middlemen and lowering duties. The idea is simple: sell cheap tea, undercut smugglers, raise revenue, and rescue the company's balance sheet. The colonists see something else: a corporate monopoly, protected by law, pushed on them without consent. They respond by dumping East India Company tea into Boston Harbor. The Boston Tea Party and the revolution that follows are tangled up with the company's bailout. So in saving the East India Company, the British government helps lose America. Actions taken to protect a corporate investment portfolio help rewrite the world map. Back in Britain, the bailout opens the company's books to public scrutiny. Parliamentary investigations reveal corruption on a breathtaking scale: bribes, rigged contracts, fortunes smuggled home. Robert Clive, once celebrated as the savior of empire, earns new nicknames: Lord Vulture, the Madras Tyrant. He's dragged before Parliament to justify his wealth, insisting he could have taken more, but chose restraint. Warren Hastings, the first governor-general under the new system, later faces an impeachment trial that drags on for 7 years. He's accused of selling offices, protecting extortionate tax collectors, and enriching himself while Indians suffer. He is eventually acquitted, but not absolved. By then, the message is clear: the problem is bigger than any one man. A structure that rewards extraction and shields it from democratic control will always find another Clive, another Hastings, another eager grain hoarder. The company hasn't malfunctioned. It has worked exactly as designed. So what do you do with a corporation that acts like a state, but answers only to shareholders? Britain's answer unfolds over decades through more crises and finally open revolt. The Regulating Act begins parliamentary oversight in 1773. Pitt's India Act in 1784 creates a board of control in London that can overrule the company on political and military matters. By 1833, a new Government of India Act strips the company of its commercial privileges altogether. No more trading monopolies; its role becomes purely administrative under government supervision. Finally, after the Indian Rebellion of 1857, fueled in part by anger among Indian soldiers who once formed that mighty corporate army, Parliament pulls the plug. In 1858, the British Crown takes direct control of India. The East India Company is dissolved. Its buildings are absorbed, its records boxed up, its name slowly fades from public discussion. But the pattern it helped pioneer, sprawling private power, public rescue when things go wrong, doesn't disappear. It mutates into institutions that seem less brutal but operate on similar incentives. Look around today and the echoes are hard to miss. Huge corporations straddle continents, control supply chains, influence politics, and sometimes wield resources bigger than many countries. When things go well, profits flow to executives and investors. When things go wrong, a financial crash, a poisoned river, a collapsed market, the costs spread outward to workers, taxpayers, and distant communities. In the 1770s, peasants in Bengal didn't get a vote in parliament. They had no say over tax policy or military campaigns launched in their name. In 1773, American colonists had no seats in Westminster either. Yet they were expected to drink company tea and help rescue its finances. That's the dark thread running from the East India Company's empire to our own world. Who bears the risks of giant enterprises and who reaps the rewards? The British eventually decided that letting a private corporation rule millions of people was madness. They learned it through famine, financial crisis, and rebellion. Today, we no longer hand corporations private armies or tax rights outright, but we do allow them to shape lives on a massive scale. When the next crisis comes, as it always does, whose side will the system take? The ghost of the East India Company quietly reminds us that answer is never neutral and it is never free.